News Nightly. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and join us this evening.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line with today's host, Colin Donovan. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
A tremendous Friday to each and every one of you. Thanks so much for tuning in to EWTN's Open Line. Colin Donovan is in the house, our very own Vice President of Theology. If you've got a question for Colin, the number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we would love to hear your question as well. Your number is 1-205-271-2985, and we will put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, openline@EWTN.com. Or you can text your question to Colin. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question. Message and data rates may apply. Michael McCall, spinning the dials, producing the program today. Your call screener is Charles Beery. Actually, it's not anymore. It's Ryan Penny. He is back in the house.
Oh, my goodness.
How many fingers am I holding up, Ryan? He went to the eye doctor this morning. I just wanted to make sure that he actually got his money's worth at the eye doctor. But Ryan Penny is back in the saddle, screening your phone calls. Jeff Burson handling our social media efforts. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook Live, type a question into the chat window. It may find its way to us by the end of the program. And alongside our very own Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan, I am merely Jack Williams. Colin, how are you?
You're never a merely, Jack, but I'm doing pretty good, and thank you for being in to host me today.
Listen, I wanted to talk a little bit here at the top of the show, kind of about the hierarchy of the faithful. We hear a lot about the hierarchy of the church and the hierarchy of the clergy, but I want to talk a little bit about the hierarchy of the faithful, especially during this election year here in the United States, and just talk a little bit about the mandate that we have as baptized Catholics to participate really in every level of society. Very few of us are called to be hermits and to go sit in a cell in a cave on the mountainside, but we are called and expected to actively participate in the culture in which we've been planted, huh?
Well, that's right. You know, originally as civilization in the West was constituted, there was a natural hierarchy among men, different. Obviously, within a family, within the larger family, you had the tribes, you had princes, you had kings, you had nobility, those who had been leaders, usually traditionally within that group of people. And so what you find in the Middle Ages is that there was the idea that the nobility and the kings, especially when they rule, would be followed. They were all Christian kings, remember that. Remember those days? Sometimes that didn't work out well with fighting over territory, but they all at least theoretically gave allegiance to Christ and to Christ's church. And so you would expect a common morality among them. This has broken down, of course, with the modern democratic state. So, you know, I think our founding document in the United States gives a very good account of this. In fact, then Cardinal Ratzinger, comparing the U.S. Constitution with the constitutions of other countries, noted that our Constitution is usually more conformable to the natural law than many of the European constitutions. So you look at, you know, the rights of the criminal and so on. In some places, there's a presumption of guilt. You have to, you know, sort of undo that presumption. In the United States and in English common law, of course, you have the presumption of innocence, and you have to prove the guilt. And you go on down the line. So you find in our Constitution, for instance, that the recognition of rights that are inseparable from the human nature. those because they come from God and nature's God, and they come from nature and from nature's God, and they don't come from the state or from others, which is, of course, what you find in statist systems, where they tend to, think of every individual as simply a cog in the larger apparatus. So when it comes then in our founding document, especially in the Declaration of Independence, we have "We the people of the United States." And so the Constitution acknowledges that the political power is an aggregation of the natural authority of the natural community. And that ultimately that power, although we recognize that it's really providentially exercised from God, is nonetheless chosen from below, from the people. And so we do it through an electoral process. This is why the founders said that for democracy to work, it required a religious people. In other words, it required a people that recognized an authority simply beyond themselves and even the authority of their own government once it's constituted. And so this authority resides in us, the people. That's why we have to explain to Christians and Catholics that we have the obligation to do what used to fall to the kings and the nobility and the princes, and that is to govern our society. We do it through representatives, but as the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence make clear, we are the actual governors. They're simply our representatives. We call them that even. And so we appoint them as delegates to make decisions. Now we have to make wise appointments. But it's important to remember, what are we appointing? Are we making saints? Are we appointing saints? I think that in most offices, if you look closely at the character of any of the parties, you'll find that very few saints are running for office. What are we looking for? We're looking for their political prudence, because their political prudence manifests their political character. They say X, they do X. Now, it's helpful if they also believe X, because and they say it therefore, and then do it therefore. That shows the integrity of the person on that level of the political prudence and political activity. But the fact that they say it and do it is enough of political character for us to say, this person can be trusted to put into place the reforms, the actions, the things that I, as the true governor of this society, in my role as the voter, wants done. I want greater justice in this area. I want greater protection in this area. I think we need to, defend our country. We need to defend our cities and our people and so on. So all of those things that we take for granted in a society in the Middle Ages as the responsibility of the kings and the princes to do is now a responsibility that falls to us. We merely delegate it to the politicians. And so we're not looking to elect saints. We're looking to elect individuals who have a party platform, who say this is what they stand for, this is what they're going to do, and then they're faithful to it. That is the character that we're looking for. If we want saints, then we need to constitute our government differently. In fact, we need to get rid of original sin. We need to convert the world. We need to get everybody to follow the gospel. And then we can have a society where all of those who are politicians are also saints. Until then, it should be enough that they are faithful to what we want them to do and follow the things that they said they would do when they were elected on our behalf.
And I think oftentimes in our culture, especially, we make the mistake of not being willing philosophically to settle for anything less than perfection. We're not going to find perfection, and it's foolish to not take the most virtuous option, right?
Right. If we're looking to affirm our own virtue, then politics is not the place to do it. Do that in the church. Do that in your cultural practices, in your daily life. Manifest your fidelity to the gospel. Unfortunately, we don't have saints running. There's a lot of things about politics, the power, the money, and the other perks of office which attract people to it, of less than sterling character, but also people of extremely good character. In that way, it's like any profession. But there are more dangers, I think, in politics perhaps than in any profession. And so we have to keep that in mind. And that's why saying and doing, I think, is an important equation to settle on, because they're representing us. We want them, yes, to exercise an independent judgment and do the right thing. But the starting point of that is that we elect them to do a particular job, and we want them to do that. And I think when you do that, there are clear decisions in almost any race that goes on in this country or other countries where you're choosing between two different programs, very often one that supports a culture of life and one that doesn't support a culture of life, and sometimes even one that is intentionally supporting a culture of death. And that's an important consideration, because they don't do things as individuals, but they do things as a group, as a party, and they maintain that discipline.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. It's EWTN's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio with Matthew Bunson. Join us every week as we talk with the Register's expert writers and editors about the news you need to know and offer authentic Catholic insights on the important stories that impact your life. Register Radio, every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Global Catholic Radio.
From the Dominican House of Studies, Father Dominic Legg.
When you're forming your conscience to be a faithful citizen this coming November, it's important to remember that not all issues are equal. Abortion is a very grave evil because it involves the direct killing of an innocent human life, and the issue of abortion has been corrupting our national politics for more than 40 years now. John Paul II said that abortion is a corrupting force because if we begin to accept it, if we say, well, it's the law of the land, and let's just learn to live with it, then we begin to lose the capacity to distinguish what is morally right and morally wrong. Let's pray that this November, our nation chooses to defend and protect human life.
For a guide to Catholic teaching and voting, visit EWTN.com/vote.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@EWTN.com.
We started the program today. Colin gave a real nice clarification and put some great perspective on our culture, how we interact with the church, and how it applies to our public life as Catholic Christians, especially here in the United States of America. A lot of material covered there. If you might have missed some of that, or if you'd like to hear it again, or if you call into the program and you just want to hear yourself make a phone call, check out the encore of EWTN's Open Line. It encores tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time right here on EWTN Radio. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. And if we can interrupt Colin's tutoring session with our producer, Michael McCall, we'll head to the phone lines. Okay. Pat is our leadoff hitter today in Madison, Georgia, listening to EWTN on Sirius XM Channel 130. Pat, thanks for holding. Welcome to the program.
You're welcome. Thank you. I would like to know, please, Luisa Piccarreta's writings at one time I thought were not approved by the church. Mm-hmm. Have they been approved?
Okay, that's a complicated question, which is resolved by just giving an account of the history of that. Okay, Luisa Piccarreta was a woman in southern Italy writing in the early part of the 20th century. She had various spiritual directors from a young age, including St. Hannibal, I forget what his last name was, but a man who went on, of course, to become a canonized saint. And he wrote these many volumes on the divine will. on the kingdom of the divine will. She also wrote other things on the Passion of Christ and Our Lady and so on. So those writings were circulating in Italian, and after she died, and a cause was instituted by the diocese or archdiocese of Trani in southern Italy, where she had lived, and it went through the processes there, and she was recognized for her life was recognized. The documentation was completed. They confirmed that she was a person who should be promoted for canonization, and she sent the matter to Rome. And so along with that were sent her writings. Now, in many parts of the world, they have not been that controversial, but in the United States, they did become so on the basis of unapproved translations in the 1990s. And on the basis of those translations, the Archdiocese of Trani forbid any promotion of those particular editions. And so the current status is that her cause is proceeding on her heroic virtues in Rome. There's no reason, I don't think, that I know of. Certainly at the Archdiocese, they did not think that there was any reason that those heroic virtues would not be recognized. She lived a very devout life in absolute submission to the Church. Her writings, because of their nature, a lot about the future, a lot about how to live in the divine will, needed careful consideration. And so they set aside the decision on the writings and the decision on her life. The decision on her writings required that they go ahead and a critical edition of them be produced, because there are linguistic problems. She spoke a dialect, so what was written down originally was in a dialect. That has to be translated into standard Italian, and then, of course, to be into English or German or Spanish or any other language, it has to be translated again. So what they wanted to do was produce a critical edition in Italian with some footnotes, some guidance from the Church, with a critical text that accompanied it that would explain how, within the context of Catholic teaching, certain things could be understood. I understand that work is either done and yet not yet approved, or that it's very close to being done. So with regard to translations, there are translations. The English is not recognized by the Church. In fact, it's where all the controversies of the 90s and so on came from, particularly in our country. On the basis of which EWTN was specifically asked by the postulation to do certain things and to promote a certain approach to the issue, which we did on our website, and you can find it there to this day. There was an interruption as we remodeled our website and our design of that, but it's back up there. It has all of that historical information in it. So it's a complicated issue, but that's where it stands. Her cause is proceeding well on the virtue element. The texts themselves have reached a certain point. I don't know that they're approved yet, but a critical edition is being created. And on the basis of that, it will then be translated under the direction of the Archdiocese of Trani and under no other direction. And they have strongly exerted their legal and moral right to control that process against all of those who say, well, we have this, we have that, we're just going to publish it as we feel fit or translate it as we feel fit. So that's where it's at.
I
Is that complicated enough for you?
Yes, but thank you. That's actually very clear. Thank you very much, Colin.
Okay, you're welcome, Pat. God bless.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Next stop, Aurora, Colorado. Eugene is in Aurora, listening on the Catholic Radio Network. Eugene, you're on with Colin Donovan.
A group of my friends and I at our parish are expecting that our aging pastor will retire very soon, creating a vacancy. And we are going to demand a right to participate, to active, decisive participation in the naming of our new pastor. Now, what do you think will be the reaction of our bishop when we assert what we claim is our right?
Well, I think his first reaction will be that you have no such right, and his second reaction will be probably to give some polite role or conversationally in the discussion. But the faithful have no such right. The church is a divine institution. The authority given there is in the sacred scripture. It's in all of the teachings of the church. The idea that it's a democracy where we get to vote and elect and do all of that is theologically ridiculous. I do think that being a layman myself and involved actively in the church, that lay people ought to be widely consulted. Obviously, in the areas of their competence, like finance and administration and things like this, ecclesiastic will, unless they're coming from having been a stockbroker or in finance or something like that, which is more and more going to be the case actually these days with later vocations, really have to rely on the laity, and the laity should be involved. They're required by the canon law to be involved in the pastoral council, in the financial councils of the diocese, and in other places. So the church provides all of those opportunities to give counsel to the authorities in the church, but the authority resides with the Pope and with the bishops and with the pastors appointed by the bishops and others as they see fit. So consultation, yes, demands that you have some right to do this. No, there would be no history of that in the church. And the places where there have been examples of that generally led to schisms and breakaway churches in places like Philadelphia and St. Louis, where the parishes decided, we don't need a king. Let's kill the king. We're going to make the decisions here, and we're not going to accept the authority of the archbishops. And they went their separate ways. They ended up usually being first warned, and they ended up being interdicted or excommunicated. So that's a risk you take, because that's not an authority that is yours. Simple as that.
And we're going to force the bishop to accept it.
Well, Colin, I think that's it's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, you can do what you want, but you have no legal, moral, or theological right to force the bishop to do anything. He has a right to listen, an obligation to listen to you and to take advice. That's just moral, if nothing else, and in some cases canonical. But that's need I say it? That's fairly arrogant.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. We have an email from Andy, who is age 10 years old, and he says, if Jesus was sinless, why did he stay at the temple when he was 12 and not tell his mom? I would have been in big trouble if I went to my dad and didn't ask first.
Well, I guess they knew each other. He didn't get much of a scolding, so obviously, well, think of the reasons that we need to ask our parents for stuff when we're little. We have no possibility of providing for ourselves. Here's the one exception in human history. We have no possibility of defending ourselves from attackers and others trying to do mischief. Here's the one absolute exception in human history to that. So I think Mary and Joseph knew there was no real concern. Jesus, of course, knew there was no real concern. And it made a very strong point for our benefit, and that is that God was his father, and he was of age because of what would have been his bar mitzvah, his confirmation, as Jews also called that coming of age. and as a consequence of that, he said about the work of the Father. So it was something maybe they needed to learn, and we needed to learn that lesson as well.
Still plenty of time for your phone calls. Pick up the phone and give us a call. I'm giving you unfettered access to a professional theologian, our very own Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan. The number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985, and we'll even put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, openline@EWTN.com. I'm Jack Williams. Colin Donovan is in the house. This is EWTN's Open Line Friday.
Raymond Arroyo, Dr. David Anders, Father Mitch Pacwa. The leading Catholic voices are on the largest Catholic media network in the world. You're listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
In these turbulent times, faith remains the bedrock for many Americans. And this November, we face one of the most consequential elections in our nation's history. That's why EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research have partnered together on a third poll that reveals how American Catholics approach issues concerning the economy, political unrest, attacks on churches, abortion, the pandemic, and more. Watch EWTN News Nightly at 6 p.m. Eastern on Monday, September 21st and Tuesday, September 22nd for an in-depth analysis of the results. Brought to you by Real Clear Opinion Research and EWTN News.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Now, when Jesus was on earth, he taught us a great lesson. He taught us that he came for the sinner, not the virtuous. He came for you because you are imperfect, because sin comes easy to you, and sometimes you don't have the willpower to say no.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Get the Catholic news perspective on today's top stories. EWTN News Nightly. Clear, concise, Catholic. Tonight, 9 Eastern on EWTN Television and Radio.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. There's nothing like Women of Grace to explain the truth of our faith, Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. And now, back to Open Line with Colin Donovan.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Still two lines open for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Next up, if I can manipulate my screen properly, is Diane in Auburn, Indiana. She's listening to us on Sirius XM Channel 130. Diane, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. My question is this. Mm-hmm. I'm having a little bit of a disagreement with one of my friends. Actually, 45 years ago, we entered the church together, and she has since drifted away after she had a divorce. And I will, put things on my Facebook about, abortion, is being wrong. And she is very, very pro-choice. And one time she posted that, her mother had to enter a Catholic hospital, which was the only choice she had, and that, they would have to take the baby so she wouldn't have her sister that were the choice, but luckily, she did not, everything worked out okay. Can you tell me the Catholic, standing on, the Catholic hospitals, what the Catholic standing really is on that?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. Taking the child. Catholics, all actually, it's a misnomer that somehow this is some special rule the church made up. Human nature teaches us not to kill our own kind, that it's wrong to do that. If anybody in a society, whether it's the government or the mother or the father in ancient Rome, the father could, I don't like this one, or he's crippled or whatever, leave him outside in the cold till he dies. But once you begin turning it over to the human will of people who are already here, you've given up the principle of the sacredness of life, or even on the natural level, that every living human being has a right to live, has a right to continue in existence, and their life should not be taken. So on the natural level, abortion was always wrong. It was one of the very first things the church attacked by name in the first century, along with contraception, by the way, the use of potions to prevent a child, and also the use of potions to kill a child. So the natural law forbids it, common sense forbids it, but people convince themselves that they have some special rights, that they're the mother. Just as in the ancient world, the Romans thought it was the father's right. So I guess we've come 180 degrees, but in that respect, we're back where we started. It's somebody other than the child's right, whether they live or not. So naturally, it's wrong. So the church has always upheld that, even when science couldn't tell the church precisely when the human being began. And so for many centuries, all that they knew was going on in there was the animation, the movement. And so once movement started, we knew that we had a human being, and that was the point at which it became absolutely forbidden. Before that, it was forbidden, but it wasn't necessarily thought to be a human life. That got blown away in the 1800s. In the 1800s, the ovum and the sperm was discovered. The process of fertilization was discovered. Embryology has expanded exponentially as a science. We know exactly what is going on, not only on the issue of life, but on the issue of sexuality, male and female. We know exactly what is going on, and we know exactly what can go wrong to produce something other than a clearly male or clear female. So science has been a tremendous boost and demonstrated that the church's insight was absolutely correct, even in the first century, even though we had no idea what was going on inside the mother. So the church absolutely has always forbidden abortion or the taking even of the child during that period when they weren't certain that that was a human being there. We now know that's the case. So there is no excuse except a sort of Nietzschean self-will, the will to be power, the will to power. And you see it in the signs, my body, myself. It's not, if it's in my body, then it's mine. If it's mine, I can throw it out. No, if it's another human being, if you don't respect a human being in the womb, then it's a choice to respect them outside of the womb. And so laws permitting even, if it was going to be aborted and it's lived, you put it in the corner and you let it die. This is going on in some hospitals. The New York state law suggested that would be permissible to do that. So once human beings decide that they get to determine when human life begins, they want control of all of human life. So where are we now? We have control at the end of human life. And if the individual can have control, it's not a big leap of logic to the government having control and determining who lives and dies at every stage. So we've sold out the principle. So if she wants to live in a society where we're not governed by what is true, what is factual, what is scientific, what is morally right, then that society can be built, and there are people who want to build it. But if you want to live in a culture of life, then you must begin respecting life the minute it makes its appearance. And human life begins at the moment of conception and continues to natural death, as the popes have asserted. This is a teaching of the church. It's affirmed in Evangelium Vitae with authority, which for all intents and purposes infallibly taught because of the manner and the language used by the Pope in that encyclical. So she has a choice as well. She has a choice between what nature teaches and what the church teaches and what she and others want. And this is the choice of every Catholic and every human being in our culture today, to choose between life and death. Just like in the first century, when the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles, it was called, repeating what was said earlier in the Old Testament. You have a choice between life and death. Choose life. We have that choice today. We have a choice between life and death. We should choose life.
Next stop is Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. Andrew is in the great state of Pennsylvania listening on Holy Family Radio. Andrew, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome, Andrew.
If I have as a practicing Catholic, I'm looking at a political candidate who is aligned with a party that is known to want to increase funding for abortion and as well as push more lenient laws. And if that candidate also personally is known to do the same, is that contrary to the gospel in any way? And if so, can it be a mortal sin on my part if I vote for him?
Yeah. Let me dig out the exact quote here for you, but I'll talk as I'm trying to find it here. It's on our website in the voting section. And in there, there's an account in the moral guide that is provided there, which I wrote. So that gives an account of the moral tradition. In other words, how does the church understand these issues? And so you get down and you look, if you looked in any moral theology textbook, before the idea of proportionalism and consequentialism, which says, well, you weigh the goods and the bads and you just decide based on the one that gives you the most good. That's a very utilitarian view. It's been condemned by the church, but some people think and even vote that way. If you go back to what the tradition says, here's an example of it in a Jesuit author. And you wouldn't have found anything other than this before the 1950s when you see the infiltration of other ideas into theology. He says, Father Davis, that it is the duty of all citizens who have a right to vote to exercise that right when the common good of the state or the good of religion and morals requires their votes and when their voting is useful. So if the voting is of no consequence, you don't have an obligation to vote. If there's a question of religion and morality at stake, then you have a responsibility to vote. You look down and you read some of the other authors, then you get into more deeply into the. Here's one from also Father Davis. It is sinful to vote for the enemies of religion or liberty. It is sinful to vote for the enemies of religion or liberty. What does that mean? We know that freedom of religion is necessary for the church to spread the gospel. God wills it, Christ wills it, the church wills it, that we be free to spread the gospel for the salvation of souls. There's no point in living in this world if it's just license and then hell. We need real freedom of religion. And what's the other thing? We need a moral people. We need a people who are taught about morality. The central point of morality is everything regarding life. Now, of those, whether it's the U.S. Bishops' Conference Faithful Citizenship, or whether it's Evangelium Vitae, or whether it's the Catechism, it's quite clear that without life, you can't have the other rights. This is why abortion and euthanasia and embryonic experimentation, which some politicians are in favor of. In other words, taking human embryos. There are lots of them related to in vitro fertilizations where they freeze the embryo to implant in the mother at some point, another gravely evil wrong. And those embryos can be taken out unthought and experimented on, or tissues taken from for experimentation. That would be gravely immoral. Those are human beings. Just because they're tiny doesn't mean they're not human beings. So life and the issues of life. Now, the other things are not of no consequence. The church says we should love and care for immigrants. The church says we should seek to provide basic health care for people. But we also should have safety of our country. It means domestically and against aggressive countries and so on. So all of these values come into play. It's true, but without them, you don't have life. So the question has to be not, well, this politician's right on 4 things, this right one's on 6, but I'm going to vote for the one who's right on 6. I would say this, that in almost every issue, a politician who would provide the greatest care and receptivity for immigrants, who would provide health care that is free and generous, and all the other things that people think are necessary, good wages, and all of these things. And they are important, and they need to be provided in some way, some suitable way, given the nature of a particular society. Ours is capitalistic, so you have to develop a private enterprise way more than a governmental way. But who wants to do that? But he wants to have also abortion and all these other things, and to maybe even make doctors perform abortions, or make Catholic hospitals perform abortions, or make Catholic hospitals do sex change surgeries against their conscience. The conscience not of a hospital, obviously, but of the people who run that hospital and hold the Catholic faith. That if you vote in this one into office and you get all of those other things and they're not inclined to give you that most important things, what's the point? But if you vote into office somebody who will start with the essentials, even if maybe we don't like what they believe and profess on some of the lesser but important issues, you might convert them because they've got the basics correct. But I would say the likelihood of converting to life those who maybe look like they're pro-life but really aren't, and would never possibly conceive of doing anything other than choice, paying for abortions, spreading abortions around the world, spreading reproductive freedom, such as they call it, around the world, that you would never convince them to adopt what has been called a consistent ethic of life, such as the Bishops' Conference and the Popes, John Paul, Benedict, Francis, have all called for. We need to have that respect across the board. But I think you have a better chance of converting those who maybe don't fit the bill on some of the lesser issues if they fit it on the greater issues. But you have zero chance of converting those who are all for social justice and taking everybody's money and spending it on and all these other things, but they would never even conceive of doing anything other than what they're already doing, and that is being not simply pro-choice, but radically pro-abortion, nationally pro-abortion, internationally pro-abortion, funding of abortions, funding of organizations that promote abortions nationally and international, forcing countries overseas to adopt these same policies as a previous administration tried to do in Latin America and Islamic countries. So life is important because you might bring people to the lesser issues from the greater, but I swear you will never get those who are for the lesser issues across the board to ever adopt the other. They are professedly against it. And it's in their writings, it's in their speeches. Don't believe me.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Colton is in Denver, Colorado, listening on the Catholic Radio Network. Colton, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Awesome. How are you doing?
Pretty good, Colton. What's your question? We got a lot of Colorado people calling today, it looks like.
Yeah, a lot of questions from Colorado. So I guess my question for you is, can people who are not Catholic die and go to heaven?
Simple answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me give you the certain case, and then I'll deal with the uncertain case or the unknown case. The certain case is baptism. There are many people who are baptized, who love the Lord, they seek the Lord, they do everything they can that they believe the Lord wants them to do. For whatever reasons, the prejudice created by their forebears or by the culture or by the bad behavior of Catholics, they can't conceive of the Catholic Church as being the true church. The Second Vatican Council taught that they are that the baptized non-Catholics are in imperfect communion with the Catholic Church. In the old days, pre-Vatican II, this was essentially recognized already, although not emphatically stated so, by the fact that they weren't rebaptized, but the excommunication for heresy or schism was lifted. Now, here's the thing. They were materially schismatics and heretics, not by their free choice or their will, because they didn't know any better. And so the popes have said, there's beautiful statement in Pope Pius IX, Blessed Pius IX, which we have on our website somewhere. You can probably find it. And that is regarding the ignorance. And his conclusion, first of all, deals with non-Catholic Christians, certainly. You look at the polemics of the last 4 or 5 centuries, and you can understand why somebody could reach the conclusion, whore of Babylon, going to hell, Pope's Antichrist, all of that. Now, some of that's over the top, of course, but you can understand, especially in light of the last few decades, that, raised in one tradition and faced with those polemical statements, it'd be very hard for somebody to come into the church. Yet they do in droves, the intellectuals especially, the pastors especially. Marcus Grodi is full-time on this question of bringing in non-Catholic Christian pastors and others into the Catholic Church, because they discover it by their reading and by our own Dave Anders, who does the show before this one called The Communion, followed that very path. And basically read his way into the church with the grace of God, obviously. But so this is quite clear, and the church acknowledges that. So the case of the baptized is less concerning. Now, I will say that once they know that they should come into the church, they better keep moving in that direction, because now they have something they might have to answer for. That doesn't mean they can't move carefully. They've got families, they've got others, considerations, but yet our obedience is to Christ and not to any in this world, and that has to be foremost in their minds. For those outside the church, that's a difficult thing to hold to. First of all, they don't have the blessings of baptism. Now, they may have an implicit understanding of God and his righteousness and goodness, and of the obligation to be moral and to be good and to act morally. That doesn't give them kind of a fake baptism or even a baptism by intention. But again, this same Pope Pius IX, in another statement, speaks with great mercy and generosity regarding how God, who desires the salvation of all, will treat such individuals. This is not a matter of the gospel, however. It was never told to us. We were told certain things. Unless you be baptized, unless you be born again of water and the Holy Spirit, you shall not enter into the kingdom. But the church holds out great hope for those of goodwill and so on who seek the truth outside of the church, that they will be saved. And I think especially among those, we have to consider the children of Abraham, because they had not sacraments as we know them, but what Aquinas called the sacraments of the old law, which communicated justice, as Abraham believed by faith, but under the old covenant, the Mosaic law. So we can have a special, could have a special appreciation of their possibility of salvation by their fidelity to the Mosaic covenant as they understand it. But for others outside of that, even it gets even more difficult. But we leave that to God. as Pope Pius IX said, he's generous, he's merciful, and only he can weigh the causes of ignorance that each individual has and the willingness of their heart to conform to the truth, in other words, to him, and he himself will weigh that. And if he has some special arrangement, it's simply unknown to us. What is laid on us is the obligation to teach the whole world and to lead them to Christ. That is our obligation. The rest, as Father Mitch likes to put it, is management's job. We're in sales, so we got to keep selling.
Next up is Sheila in Kansas City, Kansas, listening on the Amazon Echo. Sheila, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, how are y'all doing?
Pretty good. What's your question today, Sheila?
Okay, actually, I have a couple. I have a question that I just thought of a few minutes ago. It's just a quick answer, though.
Okay.
That one there is, I missed Mass on Sunday because my husband accidentally took the car keys when he left. Is that a sin? Yes or no?
No, it is not. The Mass is what's called a positive obligation. Many things can prevent us from keeping that obligation that are outside our will, whether sickness, the care by parents of children and of children by children of parents in some cases. So all kinds of things can do that, responsibilities of doctors, nurses, and others. So if it wasn't willful and intentional and just blowing off the Mass, and of course in COVID, the bishops have been very generous in excusing us anyway, then that's not a concern.
Okay, thank you for that. And the question that I was actually calling about is my husband, who is Protestant. He grew up in an Assembly of God church. Mm-hmm. His brother is an Assembly of God minister. Sometimes he kind of teases me a little bit about Mary. You know, he'll say,
sure.
Pray to Mary. But I need to figure out how to talk to him because he's very smart and I always get tongue-tied. Mm-hmm. How to talk to him about the Catholic Church and how I can prove to him that it's the way.
Yeah. Well, it's always difficult to prove. I think a good place to start is with a conversion story. Maybe Jack knows the answer to this. I don't know. I was.
Hey, listen. This is what my wife did to me. She left Scott Hahn tapes in the car.
Well,
she left RCIA pamphlets on the bathroom counter. That's the. You're probably not going to do it, and ultimately the Holy Spirit's going to do it anyway. But I would say a book of conversion stories like Surprised by Truth would be your best bet.
And I was thinking, because he hosted the Catholic Answers I was on Tuesday, Tim Staples was an Assembly of God pastor. And I don't know if he ever did does he have a conversion story? I know he's got apologetics.
Yeah, I don't know if that's published or not, to be honest with you.
But you might look for stuff by Tim Staples, whether on Catholic Answers website, Catholic.com, I think. And also see if he has a conversion story. But that's right. Get the conversion stories. They cover the bases because they've all faced it different ways. And their stories all tell a slightly different story of coming to the faith from, in most cases, a Protestant pastor of some kind or another.
Colin, I hope you have a terrific weekend.
You too, Jack. Appreciate it.
All right, on behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our producer, Michael McCall, call screener Ryan Penny, and our social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson. I'm Jack Williams. Thanks for another great week of EWTN's Open Line. Back at it again Monday with John Martinoni. Until we get together then, God bless.